Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that I think a lot of dog owners think about. When's the best time to spay or neuter your dog?
Yeah,
You hear all sorts of advice, friends, family, even like people you meet at the dog park.
right. Everyone's got an opinion.
We're going deeper than just those opinions, though. We're looking at some really interesting research out of UC Davis. It was published in Frontiers in Veterinary Science. And basically, it digs into this whole connection between what age you neuter your dog and their long-term health.
Wow.
And get this, they looked at 35 different breeds.
Oh, wow.
So to help us break down all of this, we have expert speaker with us who can, help understand all the science-y stuff. Expert speaker, are you ready to dive into this?
Absolutely. This is something that I think every dog owner needs to be educated on. And honestly, the findings of this research are pretty surprising.
Yeah.
Let's just say one size does not fit all when it comes to neutering.
Okay, that's a really good point. So, picture this. You get your new puppy. Congrats, by the way.
Yeah.
And everyone's got something to say about when you should or shouldn't get them spayed or neutered. But as dog owners, we want to be making these decisions based on science, right?
Of course.
So tell us about this UC Davis research. This wasn't just like a small study or anything.
No, this is a huge study. I mean, we're talking 15 years of data
Yeah.
from their veterinary medical teaching hospital at UC Davis.
Wow.
Thousands of dogs, 35 breeds. I mean, everything. We're talking Chihuahuas, Great Danes. They look at which dogs develop joint disorders, things like hip dysplasia, cancer, and they connected it to neutering, whether the dog was neutered and when.
15 years of data. That's really impressive.
A lot of data.
You always hear that small dogs don't really have the same risks from neutering as, the bigger guys. Did this research show that?
That's a great question, and it's a common belief, and they actually found that was true. Smaller breeds generally had a pretty low occurrence of joint problems, whether or not they were neutered.
Huh.
So at least for those breeds in the study, that myth seems to check out.
Okay, interesting. So if small dogs are just, generally, okay, what about the bigger dogs? What did they find out? I'm guessing it's a bit more complicated.
You were absolutely right. It gets more nuanced. With the large breeds, they found there was a huge range of outcomes. And it seemed to depend a lot on the specific breed and the timing of the neutering.
Okay.
So for example, in golden retrievers, they found that spaying females, no matter when they did it, was connected with a higher risk of one or more cancers compared to females who weren't spayed.
Hold on. At any age, for golden retrievers, spaying increased their risk of cancer.
That's what they found. Now, it's important to remember this is just one study, but it's a pretty significant finding.
Right.
And that's not all. For Labrador retrievers, for example, neutering didn't really seem to impact cancer rates much at all.
See, that's what's so interesting to me. Golden retrievers, Labrador retrievers, you think, oh, they're pretty similar. But this research shows how different breeds can be when it comes to this.
Yeah, and it really shows that saying, neuter your dog it's way too simple.
Yes.
It's not that
It
straightforward.
seems like when you neuter is just as important as if you neuter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the huge takeaways from this research. They found that, the timing of neutering is a really important factor for a lot of these breeds. Like, for example, German Shepherd dogs. Neutering males before they were 6 months old, that was linked to a way higher chance of them having joint disorders.
Wow.
But then delaying it until after 2 years old seemed to lower the risk significantly.
Wow. Okay, so this is all super interesting, but what's the reason? What connects neutering to joint health and cancer risk?
That's the million-dollar question, and researchers are still trying to figure it all out. But here's what we know so far. Those hormones that are produced by the ovaries and the testes gonadal hormones, they're not all about reproduction.
Right.
They actually play a really important role in growth and development. That includes things like when the growth plates in a dog's bones close.
So neutering kind of messes with that whole balance.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Those growth plates in your dog's bones? Think of them like puzzle pieces. They need those hormones to help them click into place at the right time. Neutering too early can be like taking some of those puzzle pieces away before they've had a chance to lock in. And then what happens is, for some breeds, it can mean their bones grow longer than they should, which can throw off the alignment of their joints. And that can lead to problems like hip dysplasia or even tears in those ligaments that hold their knee joint together.
So for some breeds, it's like those hormones are helping their bones grow properly, and neutering too early interrupts that.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we're starting to see how neutering can impact those growing bones, but what about cancer? That just seems like a whole other thing.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. But it comes down to those hormones again. Those same hormones that affect bone growth are also involved in, like regulating cell growth, making sure everything's running smoothly. And when you mess with that balance through neutering, it can make some breeds more likely to get certain cancers.
So it's like their hormones are kind of protecting them from cancer, and then neutering takes away that protection.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. It's not quite as simple as that, but you're on the right track.
Okay. This is all super interesting, but to be honest, it's also a lot to process. So, like, for our listeners out there, what would you say is the most important thing they should take away from this research?
Hmm, that's a tough one. I think the biggest thing is just realizing that there's no magic age for neutering that applies to every dog. You can't just say 6 months old, gotta do it then. This research really shows that it's important to talk to your vet, talk about your specific dog, their breed, their lifestyle, and figure out the best plan together.
That's such good advice because this research gives you, as a dog owner, the information you need, but then your vet can actually help you, you know, use it to make the best decision for your pup.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, this study didn't just look at dogs in general. They looked at 35 different breeds, like we were saying. So, like, what were some of the specifics?
Okay, well, let's start with a breed that's known for being pretty darn tough. The Australian cattle dog.
Oh, yeah, Aussies.
Right. So for the males, they actually didn't see an increased risk of joint disorders or cancers, whether they were neutered or not.
Interesting.
But for the females, spaying them before 6 months old was linked to a higher risk of joint problems.
So for those Aussie pups, maybe later is better, especially for the girls.
It seems to be the case, yeah.
What about Australian Shepherds? They're another popular breed. With all that running and herding, I'd think they'd be prone to joint issues.
Yeah, you would think that, right. But actually, this study didn't find an increased risk of joint problems for Australian Shepherds.
Really?
Yeah. Whether they were male or female, neutered or not, no real difference in their risk of joint problems.
Wow, that's surprising.
Right.
Maybe all that running keeps their joints healthy.
Maybe.
What about cancer for the Australian Shepherds? Did the study look at that?
They did. For the males, there was no difference in cancer risk whether or not they were neutered. For females, though, the results were a little less clear. There seemed to be a slight increase in cancer risk if they're spayed between like 6 and 11 months old and then again between 2 and 8 years old.
Uh-huh.
But we need more data to say for sure.
Okay, so something to be aware of, but not necessarily a reason to panic.
Exactly.
It's amazing how each breed really has its own, like, story, you know? Were there any other breeds that really stood out to you from this research?
Oh, absolutely. One that I found super interesting was boxers. This study actually found that neutering boxers, both male and female, before they were 2 years old, that was linked to a much higher risk of cancer.
Before 2 years old, that seems so much later than what people usually hear.
I know, right? It really goes to show why this kind of research, looking at each breed specifically, is so important. Because that old advice to neuter early, it just doesn't hold up for every breed. And in some cases, it might actually be doing more harm than good.
That's a really good point. So we've talked about a few larger breeds. What about our smaller canine companions? Those little guys are always zipping around. They seem to be pretty healthy overall.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
And you're right, a lot of the smaller breeds in this study, like Chihuahuas, Maltese, Pomeranians, Yorkies, they had really low rates of joint problems, whether they were neutered or not. And their cancer rates were pretty low across the board, too.
So it seems like, at least for those breeds, the timing of neutering might not be as big of a deal.
That's what this research suggests, yeah. But, it's still a good idea to chat with your vet.
Of course, always good advice. What about breeds that are kind of in between? Like, what about Cocker Spaniels? Did this study have any information on them?
They did. Cocker Spaniels are actually a really good example. They found that the ideal time for neutering was different for males and females. For males, if they were neutered before 6 months, it was linked to a way higher risk of joint disorders. But for the females, it was spaying them between 1 and 2 years old that was linked to a higher risk of certain cancers, especially mast cell tumors.
Wow, so it's almost like there's a sweet spot for both sexes, but those sweet spots are different.
That's exactly it.
What about Doberman Pinschers? Did this study look at them?
They did,
Mhm.
and again, timing seemed to be key. They found that for female Dobermans, spaying them at any point before 2 years old led to a much higher chance of them developing urinary incontinence.
Oh, that's not fun. So, like, the later the better when it comes to spaying female Dobermans.
It seems that way, yeah, at least according to this research.
Wow, this is all so fascinating. It really just shows that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to neutering. Every dog is different, and even within a breed, there's so many things to consider, right?
Exactly. What's so cool about this research is it's giving us these really valuable insights into breed-specific risks, which we've never really had before. But it's really important to remember that it doesn't replace actually talking to your vet.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And now our listeners have the knowledge to really have those in-depth conversations with their vets about what's best for their dog. I mean, this study looked at 35 breeds, which is a lot. But what about all the other ones out there? Were there any other really interesting findings that stood out to you from the
Oh,
research?
yeah, for sure. 35 breeds is a great start, but there are so many more dogs out there. One that I thought was really interesting was Rottweilers.
Oh, yeah. Rotties.
They're such powerful dogs.
Yeah.
And it turns out that power, well, it seems to come with a higher risk of joint problems. The study found that for both male and female Rottweilers, neutering them before 6 months old was associated with a big jump in joint disorders.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, they're probably still growing like crazy at that age.
Exactly.
Well,
And speaking of size, what about St. Bernards?
oh, wow. Yeah.
They found that for the females, spaying them before 6 months old was linked to get this a 100% occurrence of joint disorders in the study.
100%. That's like really striking.
It is. It's a really powerful finding, and I think it really just drives home the point that, a dog's breed and the timing of neutering, they're not just like boxes to check off on a list. They can have a huge impact on a dog's health.
It really can. And honestly, it's easy to get caught up in all this talk about risks and statistics and things like that.
Yeah.
So for you, expert speaker, after looking at all of this research, what's the thing you really want our listeners to take away from this whole discussion?
I think the biggest takeaway is that personalized care is key. This research is groundbreaking. It's given us all this amazing information about how neutering affects different breeds.
Right.
But we can't forget, it doesn't replace actually talking to your vet. Talk to your vet about your dog,
Yeah.
their breed, what they're like, what you're worried about,
Right.
and figure out together what's going to be best for your dog.
That is such great advice because at the end of the day, this isn't about being scared or worried. It's about being informed. And now, thanks to this research, you have the knowledge to make the best choices for your furry friend. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into neutering. I don't know about you, expert speaker, but I think I need to go give my pup some extra love and maybe a treat or two after all of that. Till next time, everyone, happy tails.